It's 2 a.m. on a freezing November night in 1946. A black Cadillac sits in the parking lot of a roadside diner somewhere in rural New Jersey, halfway between Manhattan and Atlantic City. Inside, 3 men are seated at the counter. 2 of them are legends. One is about to become a target. Frank Sinatra sits on a red vinyl stool, stirring a cup of coffee he hasn't touched. Next to him is Orson Welles, the man who terrified America with a radio broadcast about Martians. And beside them, their driver, a black man named William, who has just been told he cannot be served. The waiter, a thick-necked man with arms like ham hocks, stands behind the counter with his arms crossed. His apron is stained. His eyes are cold. "I said we don't serve his kind," he repeats, louder this time. Frank puts down his spoon. The metal clinks against the porcelain. The sound is small, but in that moment, it feels like a gunshot. What happens next will test everything Frank Sinatra believes, and before the sun rises, he will learn that winning one battle means nothing when the war has no end. To understand why Frank Sinatra reacted the way he did that night, you need to understand who Frank Sinatra was in 1946, and more importantly, who he had always been. Francis Albert Sinatra was born on the 12th of December, 1915, in a cold water flat in Hoboken, New Jersey. His parents were Italian immigrants. His father, Marty, was a boxer and a fireman. His mother, Dolly, was a force of nature, a political operative who could deliver 600 votes on election day and swing her heavy handbag at anyone who dared to call her son a wop. And they did call him that. Wop, Dago, Guinea. Frank heard these words every day walking the streets of Hoboken. He heard them from the Irish kids who ran the docks. He heard them from the shopkeepers who looked at Italians like they were dirt. He felt the sting of being treated as less than human simply because of where his parents came from. But Frank also had a Jewish neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Golden. She babysat him while Dolly worked the political machines. Mrs. Golden spoke to him in Yiddish, fed him coffee cake and apples, and gave him a mezuzah that he would wear around his neck for the rest of his life. Get the wop? The kids would yell, "Get the kike." Frank heard both, and he understood something that many never would. Hate is hate, whether it's aimed at Italians, Jews, or anyone else. By 1946, Frank Sinatra was 30 years old, and the biggest star in America. Bobby Soxers fainted at his concerts. His records sold millions. He had just starred in a short film called The House I Live In, where he delivered a message about tolerance that would win a Special Academy Award. That wasn't acting, that was Frank. But 1946 America was also a deeply segregated place. The war was over, but the battle for equality had barely begun. Black soldiers who had fought and died for freedom overseas came home to a country that wouldn't let them drink from the same water fountains as white men. And on that cold November night, Frank Sinatra was about to collide with that reality head-on. Frank Sinatra in 1946 was a contradiction walking. On stage, he was silk and velvet, the voice that made women weep and men wish they could be him. Off stage, he was a coiled spring, quick to anger, quick to fight. He had the build of a welterweight boxer, 5'7", 135 pounds, but he fought like he was invincible. He had learned early that backing down meant being owned. In Hoboken, if someone called you a name and you didn't swing, you'd spend the rest of your life swinging at shadows. So Frank swung first. Always. When I was a kid and someone called me a dirty little guinea, he once said there was only one thing to do: break his head. Orson Welles was different. A giant of a man, both physically and intellectually. Welles had directed Citizen Kane at 25. He was a genius, a provocateur, a man who could talk his way out of anything. He and Frank had met on the campaign trail for Franklin Roosevelt in 1944, and they had been friends ever since. Welles admired Frank's talent. Frank admired Welles's brain. Together, they were trouble waiting to happen. And then there was William, their driver, a black musician who played trumpet with bands in Harlem when he wasn't driving for wealthy clients. He was quiet, professional, and invisible in the way that black men in 1946 America were expected to be invisible. He knew the rules. He knew that surviving meant keeping your head down. But on this night, he was with Frank Sinatra, and Frank Sinatra didn't follow anybody's rules. The evening had started in Manhattan. Frank and Orson had dinner at Patsy's on 56th Street, talking about politics, pictures, and the future of America. By midnight, they decided to head down to Atlantic City for a late show at the 500 Club. A quick trip, a few hours on the road, nothing complicated. William pulled the Cadillac onto Route 9, heading south through the Pine Barrens. The road was dark, the kind of dark that only exists in the spaces between cities. After 20 minutes, Frank spotted the neon glow of a diner. "Pull over," he said. "I need coffee." The diner was nearly empty. A couple of truckers at a booth, a cook in the back, and the waiter, a man in his 40s, with the look of someone who had spent his whole life in this diner and resented every minute of it. The three men took seats at the counter. Frank ordered coffee for 3. The waiter looked at William. Then he looked at Frank. "I can serve you 2, he said, his voice flat. But not him. Frank's hand stopped in midair. "Excuse me?" End quote. "You heard me. We don't serve coloreds here." Orson shifted on his stool. He knew that look on Frank's face. He had seen it before. It was the look of a man calculating the exact force required to throw a punch. "Frank," Wells said quietly, "maybe we should just go." William stood up. "It's fine, Mr. Sinatra. I'll wait in the car." "Sit down, William." Frank's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. He turned back to the waiter. "You're going to bring 3 cups of coffee. You're going to put them on this counter, and you're going to do it now." The truckers in the booth looked up. The cook stopped what he was doing. The air in the diner changed. It became heavy, charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. The waiter crossed his arms. "Or what, pal? You gonna make me?" Frank Sinatra stood up. He was a small man, barely reaching the waiter's shoulder. But there was something in the way he moved, something coiled and dangerous, that made the waiter take a step back. "Let me explain something to you," Frank said. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, the voice he used before he sang a ballad. "The voice that made you lean in. This man is with me. He drove us here. He's tired. He's thirsty. And you're going to serve him coffee, just like you'd serve me." "This is my place," the waiter said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "I decide who gets served." Frank took a step closer, inches from the man now. "No, you don't decide anything. You pour coffee. That's what you do. And right now, you're going to pour 3 cups. Or I'm going to come back there and pour them myself." One of the truckers stood up. He was big, maybe 6'3", with hands like catcher's mitts. "Hey, leave Louis alone. He's just following the rules." Frank didn't turn around. He kept his eyes locked on the waiter. "The rules. You know what the rules are? The rules are what people with no courage hide behind. The rules are what cowards use to justify treating human beings like animals." He finally turned to face the trucker. "I grew up in Hoboken. You know what they called me there? Wop, Guinea, Dago. You think I don't know what it feels like to have someone look at you like you're nothing?" Frank pointed at William. "This man plays trumpet. He makes music that would make you cry. He works harder than anyone in this room. And you're telling me he can't have a cup of coffee because his skin is a different color?" The diner was silent. Frank reached across the counter. His hand found the coffee pot. He poured 3 cups, slowly, deliberately, never breaking eye contact with the waiter. "You're serving coffee for 3, Frank said, sliding a cup to William, "and you're going to smile while you do it." Years later, Orson Welles would describe what happened as the most remarkable display of sheer force of character he had ever witnessed. Frank Sinatra, 135 pounds, faced down a hostile diner full of men who could have torn him apart, and he won, not with his fists, with conviction. The waiter blinked first. He retreated to the kitchen. The trucker sat back down, and Frank Sinatra drank his coffee, sitting next to William, treating him exactly as he would treat anyone else. They finished their coffee in silence. Frank left money on the counter. As they walked out into the cold night air, Frank felt satisfied. He had won. He had stood up for what was right. But then William paused at the car door. His hand trembled slightly on the handle. "Mr. Sinatra," William said quietly, Thank you for what you did in there, but I need to tell you something. Frank stopped. What is it? William looked back at the diner, its neon sign buzzing in the darkness. Last month, about 10 miles from here, a friend of mine stopped at a place just like this. Musician, played piano. Real gentle man. William's voice was steady, but there was something broken underneath it. He asked for a cup of coffee, too. They didn't just refuse him. They followed him out to his car, beat him so bad he can't play anymore. His hands. William trailed off. He can't play anymore. The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had happened inside. Frank stood there, the cold wind cutting through his coat. For the first time that night, he didn't have words. He had won a battle inside that diner. But William was telling him something else. This wasn't a battle. It was a war. And it was happening every night, on every dark road, in every diner where a black man dared to ask for a cup of coffee. Why didn't you tell me before? Frank asked. William looked at him. Because you were already doing more than anyone ever has. Most white men would have just let me wait in the car. You stood up. That matters. He paused. But I wanted you to know what we're up against, so you understand why some of us don't fight back. It's not because we're weak. It's because sometimes fighting back means dying. Frank put his hand on William's shoulder and squeezed. Then he got in the car. They drove the rest of the way to Atlantic City in silence, but something had changed. He had walked into that diner thinking he understood injustice. He walked out knowing he had only seen the surface. That knowledge drove him for the rest of his life. In Las Vegas, Frank forced the Sands Hotel to serve black entertainers in their dining rooms. He demanded equal rooms, food, and casino access. By 1960, largely due to pressure from Sinatra and others, Las Vegas agreed to end segregation 3 years before it was abolished nationwide. Frank Sinatra was a complicated man. He drank too much. He fought too often. His life was full of contradictions and moments he probably wished he could take back. But on the question of human dignity, Frank Sinatra never wavered. Not when it cost him contracts. Not when it cost him friendships. Not when it meant standing alone in a roadside diner at 2 a.m. He once wrote, "A friend to me has no race, no class, and belongs to no minority. My friendships are formed out of affection, mutual respect, and a feeling of having something in common. These are eternal values that cannot be classified." But what William taught him that night was equally important. Standing up once isn't enough. The fight doesn't end when you win one argument. William's friend would never play piano again. A cup of coffee in a New Jersey diner didn't change that. But it was a start, a statement, a promise that Frank would keep fighting, even when the wins felt small against the enormity of the injustice. Because, in the end, what else are you supposed to do? This is the Frank Sinatra that history sometimes forgets. Not the singer, not the actor, not the man with the hat and the martini. The man who refused to stay silent when silence would have been easier. The man who learned that winning one fight means nothing if you don't show up for the next one. This was Frank Sinatra, Legacy Confidential. If this story changed how you see the chairman of the board, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel, because we're just getting started. There are stories about Ava Gardner, about the Kennedy betrayal, about the lonely final years that nobody talks about. Tell us in the comments, what is real courage? Is it winning one battle? Or showing up for the fight every single day, even when you know you can't win them all? I'll see you in the next video. Until then, remember, your voice matters. Use it.